pain it was to film everything. Not that it was hard, just buttons to push. So, I'll show you some pictures of French when we get a couple things on the board. If I get a phone, you're putting that away. And not again when I saw it, right? So, a couple things we gotta get real fast. So, World War II ended. What year did World War II end?
45.
Say it again?
45.
Yeah, 1945. And who was the American ally that basically broke the back of the German army? The Soviets. Therefore, we're scared of them. Which actually, yeah, Stalin was a horrible person, and they did exaggerate the threat of him. We didn't realize how bad the Soviet Union was absolutely devastated by the war. But the war ended, and that's when we get the beginning of the Cold War. And all of Vietnam has got to be seen through the lens of the Cold War. It has to be seen. And this is a rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. We're not going to go into all the details right here. They were allies in World War II, but you could see it breaking apart when the war was ended, when it was clear Germany was going to lose. In fact, it's a good point that the United States frantically tried to get the atomic bomb dropped on Japan before the Soviets entered the war. In fact, that's certainly why they did. Because we didn't want the Soviets to claim half of Japan like they did claim half of Germany. And I wrote that there, but I'm going to pull this map down. By the way, some of you might have seen this before. Ever showed you this map? Why this is the most dangerous map in the world? Are you ready?
Oh.
I want to get caught. So, if any of you are bad, do you want to know how you're going to get the paper cut? Have to drop a limb. Down board. Okay. It's a grip. It's done. I don't even know why. I don't even know where this came from. Ocean fresh hand sanitizer looks. There it is. Yeah, I noticed this on my desk the other day. They must have gave me this, and it just absolutely stinks. Who wants it? Okay, so after the war, this was decided by the Allies, but Germany was divided in two. And we got East Germany and West Germany. But more importantly, Berlin, in the middle of the Soviet occupation zone, was divided four ways. Or when I was your age, it was East Germany and West Germany. And the reason we're mentioning this is everything they're going to talk about in the first part about going to the war, I always came back to Berlin. Berlin was the focal point of the Cold War. So we have this rivalry. Now, technically, they were supposed to come together, the four countries that occupied Germany, the Soviets, the Americans, the British, and the French. So those four countries were going to unify at some time. They never did. And the same thing was going to happen in Korea. It did happen in Austria. They did unify into a neutral Austria because it was divided also into four occupation zones. So was Vienna. There was an East and West Vienna for about 8 years, which is kind of forgotten because it became technically a neutral country. But back to this. And that became the focal point of the Cold War. And then a few things happened. There was the Soviet Union started intriguing in Manchuria, in Iran, or at least we claim they were, in Turkey, a few other places. But in Greece. And I have to say this, what does Greece have to do with Vietnam? It has a lot to do with Vietnam. In 1947, there was a nasty military dictatorship in Greece. Britain was kind of their patron, and some of you might know this. Britain was their patron. So Britain was trying to prop up this dictatorship. Britain was broke after the war, and they said we couldn't prop it up anymore. And there was a revolution between this nasty military dictatorship that would be there to the 1980s. They were infamous for death squads and torture. And would become one of America's closest allies. Now they have a democracy, but and a homegrown rebellion against it. And the leaders of that rebellion were homegrown, meaning, now, how did that grow? No. It's actually kind of funny how a communists go over to Greece. Greek communists were fighting a revolution in Greece. And Britain said, we can't support, we're out of money. Boy, Britain fell fast after 2 world wars. So the United States started to butt in. The US had never done this before. And so President Truman had to come up with a way to convince Congress to appropriate money to send to Greece. So what did he do? Scared the hell out. And said, if Greece falls, what's next? Wyoming. Right?
That's not a city.
Well, I think we could have held it off. I know what you're thinking, or who would want it. Moving on. And that is going to be called the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine. All it was a foreign policy speech. It had no law. But Truman gave this speech to try to convince Congress to appropriate money to give to Greece. And so what he said is communists were about ready to take Greece and Turkey. No, communists were not about ready to take Turkey, but why not expand it? By the way, what is Truman doing? Not just fear-mongering, which is, yes, he was. Lying through his teeth. This might shock you. Politicians sometimes lie. In fact, people out there sometimes lie. And here that would never happen. But out there. Me, I would never lie. Moving on. So the Truman Doctrine. And the whole thing about the Truman Doctrine was basically, if Greece falls, they're all that will spread revolution. The communists will be emboldened in Greece, and they'll have the revolt in Italy, and the revolt in France. And what this was called, what effect? We always say theory, but they actually at first called it effect. The domino. Thus, Greece, Italy, France, Britain, Wyoming. A row of dominoes. By the way, does it work that way?
Yes.
Absolutely. Of course not. Problems in Greece have nothing to do with problems that might pop up in Italy or problems that might pop up anywhere. Like, for example, let me throw a place out. Vietnam. They have nothing to do with each other. This was a simplistic vision to convince people who probably couldn't have found Greece on a map, telling them if we don't stop them there, they're going to steal and eat your children. I'm only partially joking there. That's about right. So the domino effect. And here's the other thing. We have a bipolar world, us versus them. The communist versus the free world. Now, no, the world's not like that at all. But if you make it that easy, then you can pick the good guys and the bad guys and who we support. People like simplicity. Complex answers with a lot of nuance and gray area are hard, especially if you don't have a lot of background knowledge. Don't you just like to know they're bad? Let's get them. Right? You don't have to think then, do you? Life is so much easier when you don't have to think. Oh, by the way, if you don't have to think, that means the people who do know, boy, can they manipulate those who don't. Wow. And so this easy world, we saw the same thing with the war on terror, and when all of a sudden people rediscovered Afghanistan, what was going on there a few weeks ago, then all of a sudden, oh, stuff's going on in Afghanistan. Why didn't we do more? Same kind of thinking. It just drove me nuts. But if it's bipolar, that means every communist is the same, whether or not they're in Greece, Italy, China, Vietnam, or Laramie. Everyone's the same. I'd go through and pick what Wyoming City and Laramie. Yeah. Gillette, maybe. Laramie. So with that means every communist is the same. That means who directs it. We've been to this long time. The Kremlin. Everything comes from the Kremlin, the beautiful capital of the Soviet Union. When the Bolsheviks took power, they lost St. Petersburg, so they moved to the religious capital and put the capital in the big church. And it's still there.
capital of Russia.
Yeah, it's in a big church. It used to be St. Petersburg, but the Bolsheviks were losing St. Petersburg, so they moved it to Moscow. And it's just been there ever since. So St. Petersburg was the capital. But to me, it's all, by the way, somebody's smiley face. Yay, the Kremlin. Should have been red. Haha. Okay, so with that, they got the money. But once we did that, we as a country did this, the Truman Doctrine. That became the basis of American foreign policy to this day. Because everybody who would go to school and learn about foreign policy, learn about this, would be taught by people who learned from people who learned this. And so when the Cold War ended, it turned into terrorists, or whatever it might be. My guess is in China more and more is going to become that. There's a lot of problems with China, and they're listening. And they keep trying to bring back Russia, but Russia is such a weak, poor country that it's kind of funny almost to demonize Russia. Okay, weak, poor country with lots and lots and lots and lots of nuclear weapons. And what?
I see the Russian.
Yeah. They always, like same with Iran, even though Iran's even smaller. But isn't this great? Scare everybody, get in the vote for us? So with that, once you do that, and Truman said, we must spend money to go here. Do you see the problem? What if the next thing comes up? And the president says, well, no, that's not as important. Wait a second. You said the domino effect. It doesn't matter where it starts. If it starts, we're next. And that would commit the United States to war after war after war. Why? Domestic politics. No American president, no politician wanted to be called soft on communism. No one wanted to be called a communist sympathizer, a pinko, or pink. Close enough. Pinko. Close enough. Pinko. Oh, no. Or not right communist or red. No politician wanted to be called that. And so every politician would be, I'm going to be tough on communism. Now, what does tough on communism even mean? More and more, it's going to mean weapons, war. So when things started happening, politicians had no choice. So in 1949, after Truman was reelected president, big upset. 49, Truman. Two big things happened that just scared everyone to death. August 1949, Joe won. You know what Joe won was? It was the first Joe.
Soviet nuclear, the U2.
You're 11 years old. I know there's so many things. You said
The Soviet nuclear bomb.
yeah, the Soviet exploded an atomic bomb. Joe won.
Oh, in what island was that on?
They did it in Siberia, but the Americans did it at Bikini Atoll. That's the Americans. I know all these things start blending together. The U.S. codenamed it Joe 1. Trust me, the Soviets did not. Nowhere they're going to call it out. Hey, Joe Stalin. Ha ha. Yeah, you will be disappeared. And they got it with spies at Los Alamos with the U.S. major bomb. So that made people think, well, now there's communists everywhere. But the U.S. demobilized most of its army after World War II, but we had the atomic bomb. The Soviets had this amazing army. Remember they beat the Germans? But we had the bomb. Now we don't have a monopoly. Truman was a Democrat. Who blamed Truman? Republicans. Isn't it easy? The Democrats allowed the Soviets to build their bomb. Like, what are they supposed to do? It doesn't matter. Who cares?
Copyright the bomb.
Copyright, yeah. We should send the police. And since it's international, it should be the Swiss police, right? Yeah. Swiss. Do you see the point there? What a great political weapon. How do you defend yourself against that? What are we supposed to do? That's what a pinko would say. What? By the way, if you think politics are dirty today, kind of weird, weak parties and then nasty polarized party at the same time now, it's been like that for a really long time. It's always been like that. And George Washington's being called a traitor. Things have always been like that. And then November 1949, China. What happened in China?
Boxer Rebellion.
There was a Boxer Rebellion, but yeah, the Chinese Communists won. Mao Zedong won. Boxer Rebellion was 1900. I know they got to start blending together. But that's good memories. Actually, the Boxer Rebellion would help the communists. We're not going to let them do it again. The Chinese Communists took over. The U.S. was aiding the nationalist government, and then it was so corrupt we quit aiding them. The communists took over, the largest country in the world, population-wise. And what became the cry in the United States by political opponents of Truman? Who lost China? Like Truman had China to lose. What's he supposed to do? Do you want World War III? Of course not. They just want a political tool to use against them.
So
Once again, that reminds me of what happened in Afghanistan.
Mao Zedong rose to
Mao
power.
Zedong.
Mao Zedong rose to power.
Yeah, he was the Chinese communist. He would eventually make himself into a dictator. There are some issues with Mao.
Okay.
Mao Zedong. What's the point about this? Truman was hit and the Democrats hit. In fact, it was hit so bad, a lot of the Democrats started saying, oh yeah, Truman should have been tougher, like piling on. So we saw the same thing in Afghanistan. So, history just echoes. It just kind of made out this is the same crap. Keeps happening time after time, but moving on. So when the next time that happens, Truman's like, I'm not going to be accused of losing China. Does that make sense? So in June 1950, what war began?
Korea.
The Korean War. 1950. So, Korea, right here, it was a Japanese colony, brutal colonization. When the Japanese pulled out, they did the same thing. Basically occupied it, Soviet occupation zone, US occupation zone. I had the Undersecretary of State Dean Russ literally just put a line on the board, 38 parallel, that'll be where they'll divide. They'll be unified sometime down the road. But after Berlin was not unified, they left South Korea and North Korea. In North Korea, they left a strong dictator with a strong army, experienced fighters, and they decided to unify Korea. And almost lost. It was close, yeah.
Why is so confused? Because isn't there a thing in Hungary where the Soviets went in
56.
56, they overtook and put in their own dictatorship, and Hungary waited for the US to come, but we never fought the communism. So why do we put so much effort into Korea and Vietnam, but we just didn't do anything? Hungary?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but look at the map.
Yeah, it's right next to it. So
And there's no border.
okay.
And that was seen more as a direct, in the direct sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. And so in Korea and Vietnam, we went there technically to save South Korea and to save South Vietnam, not to invade another country. Yeah, no, save is actually a pretty good way to put it. But good question. That's a really good point. And there's another thing then. That could lead to World War III. Which, that's a good point. Which, that's also pretty sad. We convinced Hungarians to rise up, and what happened? So why do we have our phone out? Where I get a phone. There's my two. It's happened twice today. I'm relatively in a good mood because it's Friday. And of course, no, I'm in a bad mood again. Because I just remembered it's a 3-day weekend. Darn it. Let's go. All right. So, the Korean War. North Korea invaded, nearly took it all. The U.S. sent troops. Truman's not going to be, he's not going to lose Korea, right? The U.S. sent troops. And this, when I said I couldn't find Greece on the map, trust me, virtually no Americans could find Korea on the map. There's no way. Korea, what the heck's that? I mean, it was a brand new country. South Korea and North Korea came about 1949. You didn't know where it was. Boom, we're in Korea. Like, what the heck, another war? And what happened was this. I need my mouth. Oh, that wasn't good. I'm scared of this map. Beautiful? Beautiful. By the way, it irritates me one thing they do. You see the same colors there? When I was a kid growing up in the Cold War, it was always the commies were red and the free world was blue. Green and orange. Come on. South Korea had no army. They pushed them all the way back to here. The few American forces, fat and happy from occupation duty in Japan, were nearly destroyed right here at a place called Taeshan. This is a disaster.
So North Korea pushed
All the way to here. But they ran out. They outran their supply lines. The U.S. counterattacked with fresh troops and pushed all the way up to here, to the Chinese border.
Well, we technically passed the Chinese border.
Huh?
We technically passed the Chinese
Yeah, it's true. The new country, the People's Republic of China, which the U.S. did not even recognize as China until 1979. We recognized Formosa, which today we call Taiwan, as China. It was good China and bad China. And now we don't recognize Taiwan as a country. It's the People's Republic would go nuts. They said, we're not going to allow you to conquer our ally, even though they didn't really like each other, but whatever. We're not going to allow you to conquer them. We ignored that, and the Chinese counterattacked and inflicted the worst defeat on the United States Army since the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Just chaos. Retreated all the way to here. The Chinese outran their supply lines, and they pushed into this line, and eventually it ceased fire in 1959. Over 40,000 Americans, maybe up to 1.5 million Chinese died, over 2 million Koreans died. I mean, this is a bloodbath. Technically, we're still at war. We fought there for a land war with China. China had a lot of people, we had the weapons. Firepower. Kind of developing the American way of fighting. Blow everything away. Firepower. Was that worth 40,000 miles? Was it worth it to the South Koreans who didn't want to be? You see the problem when you start getting like that? If it was worth that, shouldn't they have done it themselves and shouldn't we let them decide? I mean, it's a real issue that we see today. There's us as them. But here's the thing politically. Truman went in and said, I'm not soft on communism. We saved Korea. Politically, he would leave office as one of the most unpopular presidents in American history. But, by the way, today he's considered pretty good. One of the very popular presidents. Things kind of do a little topsy-turvy thing. That was worth 40,000 troops. What's the next war going to be worth? So you have a combination of, hey, we've now committed. What's the next politician? Are they going to go that far? And do we want another war with China? So this is our playing with fire. That's Korea. So that begins the Cold War. In 1952, there was an election. Truman lost. Who's the new president? He was alive.
Oh, you would have been. that is true. Good old Jack.
Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower is the new president, 1952. Ike is president.
That's not.
We'll see. Why are we not just I have to find out. I wonder if I was smart enough to put that in. Okay. So Ike's president. 2 terms. He's a Republican, liberal Republican. Don't exist anymore, but back then they did. They were much more conservative Democrats then too, mostly Southerners. But Eisenhower, president. Now we have the Cold War. What's he going to do? Once they get the heck out of Korea, they finally negotiated a peace agreement. It had to do with Chinese POWs. It lasted a year. after they basically came up, which is just depressing. Until we get to Vietnam, then you'll find out what depressing is. But I found out, what is he going to do? He's got this Cold War. If anything happens, where it looks like the Soviets have advantage, what will he be called? Yeah, soft on communism. And the Republicans very effectively used a campaign slogan called the Bomber Gap, where they convinced the American public that the Soviets had all these long-range bombers, and waves of them are going to come flying over the United States and drop their new atomic bombs. And since the American public didn't know, they believed it. The Democrats have made us weak. The Soviets had no bombers that could do this. But we didn't know. And they lied, and it worked. So I was talking to this guy, he's now in he's 80. But he grew up north of Great Falls. And when he was a kid, he remembers his dad would go to, oh God, what's the town just north of Great Falls?
Okay.
No. My mind is frozen. Good story, huh? You know, I can really spin a yarn. My mind literally just froze. Kind of north, that's northeast, not Albert. It'll come to me, it'll come around and tell the story, no, it doesn't matter. But his dad remembers it was the early 1950s, and they were going to put a 50 caliber machine gun on top of the grain elevator. So when the Soviet bombers come flying over, they shoot it from the grain elevator.
Yeah.
That's insanity. That should give you an idea how scared we were. And I got to admit, I would like to have seen that from a distance behind it. But here's the thing about Ike. Ike also wanted to end the arms race. He wanted to be the general who bought peace. Does that make sense? The general who brought peace. He wanted to end it. And so he wanted to do this, but at the same time he knew that members of his own party would bitterly attack him for being soft on communism. So he had to look tough on communism and then figure out a way to end it. By the way, what is the era when the junior senator from Wisconsin accused people, this kind of McCarthyism and the Red Scare? All I think it was an accusation of being communist and people were losing everything they had. I mean, this was a terrifying time of rabid anti-communism. There was a whole wave of loyalty oaths. There were schools in the United States where every teacher had to sign a loyalty oath. Students had to go through loyalty oaths. Why do you think the Pledge of Allegiance was also never have to say that because you have to prove you're not a communist?
But a communist wouldn't say that.
Well, that's the funny thing. Like you would say, this is the original way they did the Pledge of Allegiance. World War II changed back to this. I don't know why, but so you start a pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of Communists. No, I can't do it. By the way, that's always the funny thing about loyalty oaths. If you were actually a communist spy trying to overthrow the government, what's the first thing you would do if someone gave you a loyalty oath? You bet. Where do we get those commies? By the way, you don't do that to fund communists. You do that to control them. You sign this, now I'm in charge, aren't you? So, what they would do in school, there were schools where students would have to do loyalty oaths. And stories of teachers making all their students do a loyalty oath. So, stand up. Soft on communism, huh? It always just makes me laugh. In a scary way, because I could also see that. I could see it happening again. It almost happened in 2001, 2002, after September 11th. It was unreal. You guys missed that one. But, so we try to look tough on communism. So you had a combination of threatening nuclear war for the most minor thing, and then trying to figure out a way to end it. Cut defense spending. Emphasize nuclear weapons, cut defense spending. That's what he wanted to do. And you see the problem with that. If the Soviets do anything, we'll blow the world up. Are you really going to blow the world up? So, if you have this secret operation, a secret plan, what we're going to do then, Eisenhower, has everyone got that point about threaten tough, cut back? But what happens if there is a war? Like Korea, we got to go back. What do you do? Two things. Number one, military aid. We will give military aid to our friends who are fighting communism. Therefore, we can keep it at least controlled, contained. So we started sending more, and do we have a precedent for this? Here's my Greece, right? Greece. Where else do you send weapons? You can send it to all over Europe. In fact, we sent weapons to a fascist government, Spain. And we just fought fascism in World War II, and by 1952, we're sending them weapons because they're anti-communist. Dictatorships all over the Middle East, in Latin America. Why? Anti-communist. Number two, use this new group created during the Eisenhower administration called the CIA. I mean, now the CIA is just basically soldiers. They just kill them. They do gather some information, but they mostly just run the drone operations in about 15 countries in Florida. And it's a little disturbing, but corporate operations. So if we can stop communism before anybody knows, no one can say Eisenhower stopped on communism. So we began to send spies in various places. We began to break the law by overthrowing governments, which was against the law, but if no one knows it, it's secret. So, for example, the first place they did it, the CIA had got a test run by helping overthrow a democracy in a place called Syria. They overthrew a democracy and thought it might be too close to communism. It wasn't, but it might be. Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen in Syria. Don't worry, everything's fine. Nothing is secret. 1953, the CIA overthrew a democratically elected homegrown democracy in what big oil-rich country? Where? Close. Iran. Once again, there'll be no problems with Iran down the road. Gee, that would have no problems because of that. Iran. And you can see it in Guatemala. You can see it in independent countries like the Congo or Mozambique or Angola. So they did this in secret. Another place they did it in secret, remember that map? What country is just to the west of North Vietnam? Laos. South Vietnam, yeah. Laos. Same thing. Oh, shoot, I think so we're setting up a little bit, then fly the war, sound good? So we get to France, and then the very next thing I was going to tell you, or the French in Indochina. Yeah.
So you said that I'm going to stop the arms race, so this is we belong to also, right?
Say it again. Oh yeah. So we can pass on that.
Also not building a personal.
Yeah, he's but he knew he'd be attacked, so he's got to talk. That's what it means for ranks and shit. Rank of nuclear war. Have a great weekend, everybody. I know you're going to be sad. Good job today.
Yeah, it's really cool how the CIA
FBI, how terrible that's just like kill people.
Today.
Yes, that was cool.
That's so awesome.
I think I forgot. I will change it right away.
Now here's the question. Doing all that is not still.
Have a great day, everybody.